Once upon a time, hidden beneath the protective arms of tall ancient trees, sat the village of Okuta, a place where life was simple, traditions were sacred, and honor meant everything. For generations, the people of Okuta lived by a single truth: their daughters must remain pure, untouched until marriage, a reflection of the village's dignity and their ancestors' blessings. Every parent in Okuta carried this pride like a crown. It was not uncommon to hear them boast at moonlit gatherings. "My daughter walks in the ways of the old," they would say, chins high, eyes gleaming. To them, the purity of their daughters was a badge of good upbringing, a way to show the gods that Okuta had not strayed from its sacred path. The village thrived in peace. The rivers sang, the crops flourished, and children laughed in the fields. It was said that the gods smiled on Okuta because of their unwavering respect for tradition. But seasons change, and winds carry more than just leaves. It was during the Harmattan season that Adesewa arrived, the niece of one of the village women. She came from the city, Lagos, where the air buzzed with noise and freedom. She was unlike anything Okuta had seen before. Tall and striking, Adesewa wore her hair in bold styles, her clothes vibrant, her presence magnetic. When she walked through the village square, conversations halted. Men stared, women whispered, children peered from behind doorways. To the village girls, Adesewa was a revelation. She moved with a confidence they had never dared to imagine for themselves. Her laughter rang clear and unbothered. She spoke of places where girls chose their futures and wore what they pleased. To the young maidens of Okuta, Adesewa was not just a visitor, she was a symbol of something new, something forbidden and exciting. Murayo, daughter of Bale Akinlolu, was among those watching. She had always been the model daughter, graceful and obedient. But as she observed Adesewa's carefree strut and the way men gifted her with attention and sometimes small tokens, a spark of curiosity lit within her heart. "What harm could it do?" she whispered one evening to her friend, "to wear a little rouge or to walk with a little more pride?" The days grew warmer, and so did the girl's fascination. Slowly, subtle changes rippled through Okuta. A bit more color on their lips, skirts just a shade shorter, laughter a little louder. They mimicked what they saw in Adesewa, unaware that with every step they drifted further from the values they had been taught since birth. The elders noticed, of course. Baba Oj, the village oracle, would sit silently under the old iroko tree, his brows knitted in quiet concern. Bale Akinlolu, too, would sigh heavily as he watched his daughters, sensing a shift he could not yet name. But tradition is a fragile thing, and the winds of change, once stirred, are not easily calmed. Little did they know, the gods were watching too. The full moon hung low over Okuta, casting a silver glow on the cracked earth and quiet huts. It was during such nights that the village elders gathered, seated in a circle, speaking of crops, marriages, and the welfare of their people. But tonight the air was heavier, troubled by things left unsaid. Across the village, a different gathering stirred. Behind the old marketplace, hidden by the thick shadows of the baobab trees, the young maidens of Okuta whispered and giggled. They admired the way Adesewa wore her wrapper low on her hips, the sheen of her skin, the shimmer of beads in her hair. But there was more. Stories began to spread. Stories of how she never lacked, how gifts and coins found their way into her hands without hard labor. "Men admire her," one girl sighed. "They give her things," another whispered. Murayo listened keenly, her heart thudding in her chest. She was the Bale's daughter, expected to lead by example, yet something within her stirred. She remembered how Adesewa had smiled at her once, leaning close to murmur, "You could have the world at your feet, Murayo, if only you dared to live a little." Temptation is a silent thing. It does not shout. It creeps. One evening, emboldened by her restless dreams, Murayo followed Adesewa discreetly. She watched as Adesewa met a traveling merchant behind the riverbanks. Gifts exchanged hands, a beautiful piece of jewelry for a secret meeting in the shadows. Moreo's eyes widened. It was that easy. Soon after, Moreo approached the merchant with shy smiles and downcast eyes. What began as mere curiosity turned into a secret, and like wildfire, it spread. One by one, the village girls followed the same path. Some did it for the gift's silken cloth, beaded anklets, precious trinkets. Others did it for the attention, the feeling of being noticed, desired. They painted their faces subtly, practiced alluring smiles in their mirrors. At first, it felt harmless a game, a secret rebellion against the strict walls of tradition. And at the center of it all was Adesewa. She became the orchestrator, quietly arranging meetings, teaching them how to catch a man's eye without a single word. In return, she took a small share of the gifts, a bracelet here, a few coins there. To her, it was just a favor, a small price for the life she believed they deserved. But the gods were watching, and Okuta's soil, once rich and forgiving, began to wither. First, the yam crops failed. Leaves drooped and browned under the sun's gaze. The river's waters, once sweet and lively, became dull and heavy. The goats and cows fell ill without reason, their bodies weak and frail. Then the people. Strange fevers, persistent coughs, sleepless nights. Fear seeped into every home. At first, they blamed the changing seasons. Then they blamed bad luck. But as the suffering deepened, even the blind could see. This was no ordinary misfortune. The elders called for Baba Oje. Under the great iroko tree, surrounded by the worried faces of the villagers, Baba Oje sat in silence, eyes closed, fingers tracing patterns in the dust. Finally, he spoke. "The gods are displeased," his voice heavy with sorrow. "The sacred traditions have been broken. The purity that once protected Okuta has been lost." The villagers gasped, disbelief rippling through them. The maidens had always been their pride, obedient, pure, untouched by the ways of the outside world. Baba Oje's next words cut deeper. To lift the curse, 2 true virgin maidens must carry the offering to the sacred altar. Eyes turned toward the young girls. Surely, they thought, many would pass the test. They always had. But the gods knew what the villagers did not. And the test would reveal a truth too bitter to swallow. The morning of the test dawned heavy with expectation. From every hut and every corner of Okuta, the villagers gathered before Baale Akinlolu's palace. Mothers fussed over their daughters, smoothing wrappers and muttering prayers under their breath. Fathers stood with arms folded, pride and worry battling in their hearts. At the center of the courtyard, Baba Oje stood solemnly beside a large ancient calabash filled with sacred river water. Within it, hidden from sight, lay the Odin necklace, a relic blessed by the gods. Baba Oje lifted his staff and spoke, his voice carrying above the restless crowd. "Only those pure in body and spirit can retrieve the necklace. Let the maidens step forward, one by one." Moreo was the first. She stepped forward, her once bold heart now quaking with fear. She knelt before the calabash and plunged her trembling hand into the water. She searched and searched, but her hand came up empty. A murmur swept through the crowd. Next came Anika, daughter of the yam farmer, empty-handed. Then Folake, the weaver's pride, nothing. One after another, the maidens of Okuta tried all the bright, laughing girls, who only moons ago had sat at their mother's feet learning the ancient songs. Not one could retrieve the necklace. The crowd grew restless. Whispers rose like smoke. How can this be? Not even Moreo? Surely someone will succeed. Baba Oje's face was stone. He called for the last girl. The final maiden stepped forward, the youngest, barely past her 12th year. Even she came up with wet, empty fingers. A hush fell over the courtyard. It was the kind of silence that choked. Baal Akinlolu's face paled. The council of elders shifted uneasily. Mothers clutched their wrappers tighter. Fathers looked to the ground, shame burning their cheeks. From the edges of the crowd, a voice rose, shrill and accusatory. "It's Adesewa," an old woman cried. "She brought city ways to Okuta. She corrupted our daughters." Another voice joined in. "It was her bright clothes and shameless walk. She taught them to forsake our ways." A wave of anger surged through the villagers. Heads turned, eyes narrowed, and in a breath, all blame fell on Adesewa, the girl who once walked through Okuta like a queen, now standing small and silent amid a sea of resentment. Adesewa said nothing. Her heart pounded so loud she thought the earth might hear it. She had never meant for this to happen. She thought she had only been showing them another way to live, a way to be seen, to be admired. But now she saw it for what it was: a slow erosion, a poisoning of something pure and fragile. Baba Oj raised his staff again, commanding silence. "The gods see all. They demand atonement. One must carry the sacrifice to the sacred altar." The villagers whispered among themselves. Who would they send if none were pure? Eyes turned once more to Adesewa. It was she who had led them astray. It was she who must make it right. The sun hung heavy in the sky as the villagers gathered once more in the square of Okuta, their faces hard with anger, their hearts heavy with betrayal. Bale Akinlolu rose from his seat, his once proud figure now weighed down by sorrow. He spoke slowly, each word thick as smoke. "The gods demand a sacrifice, and since no true maiden remains among us, the one who led us astray must bear this burden." All eyes turned to Adesewa. She stood still, her bright clothes now dull against the dust, her head bowed in silent acceptance. There was no plea for mercy, no cry of innocence. In her heart, she knew this was her debt to pay. Baba Oj stepped forward, holding a calabash filled with sacred offerings: palm oil, kola nuts, cowries, and the Oda necklace, still untouched. "You will carry this alone," he said to her. "You will walk to the altar of echoes deep within the sacred forest. There, you will lay it before the gods and beg for their mercy. Only then may Okuta be free." Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Ajibade, had journeyed from the city upon hearing the calamity. They stood at the edge of the gathering, helpless. Mr. Ajibade's face was grim, his jaw tight with regret. Mrs. Ajibade wept silently, her hands trembling as they clutched her shawl. They had raised Adesewa with love, but without limits, and now she would pay the price. Without a word, the calabash was placed upon Adesewa's head. The villagers turned their backs as she began her walk, a lonely figure swallowed by the long, winding path into the forest. The trees grew thicker the further she went. The air turned damp and heavy, and the light dimmed until only slivers of sunlight pierced the canopy. Her feet ached, her shoulders burned under the weight of the calabash. Sweat mingled with tears on her cheeks, but she did not falter. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just from the burden she carried, but from the memories pressing down on her, the admiration in the girl's eyes, the giggles in the dark, the secret meetings, the slow unraveling of something sacred. She realized now that what she had admired about the city, the freedom, the attention, the boldness, came with a cost. In her world, choices were made freely. In Okuta, choices had consequences that stretched far beyond herself. As she walked, Adesewa whispered to the gods. She begged for forgiveness, for mercy, not for herself, but for the village she had harmed. She promised if the gods would lift the curse, she would carry her shame with grace. She would bear whatever punishment they deemed fit. After what felt like days, she reached the altar of echoes, an ancient stone platform draped in moss and silence. Gently, she placed the calabash down. She knelt before it, pressing her forehead to the cool earth. "I have sinned," she whispered, "not only against myself, but against Okuta. Forgive us." The wind stirred, and for a moment, The forest seemed to sigh a deep, ancient breath. Something shifted. The leaves shimmered, the trees creaked, and the oppressive air lifted just slightly, as if a hand had been eased from the villagers' throats far away. Adesewa remained kneeling, her body trembling with exhaustion, her spirit bruised but not broken. She had come seeking forgiveness. Now, she could only hope the gods would grant it. "Would you like me to journey back to Okuta?" was slow and grueling. Adesewa's legs wobbled with each step, her body drained, her heart hollowed by the depth of her regret. Yet, as she neared the village, something in the air felt different. Gone was the oppressive stillness that had gripped the land. The river whispered once more as it flowed. The trees lifted their wilted branches toward the sun. From the fields came the sound of cautious laughter as children chased each other between fresh shoots of yam, tiny green signs of hope. The curse had lifted. Word spread quickly. The sacrifice had been accepted. The gods had heard Adesewa's pleas. When she finally walked through the village gates, the people of Okuta gathered to meet her. They did not cheer, they did not celebrate. Instead, they stood in heavy silence, a wall of faces marked by relief, but also by lingering resentment. Bali Akinlolu stepped forward. His once proud face was now lined with sorrow deeper than anger. "The gods have accepted our offering," he said, his voice firm yet weary. "But forgiveness from men is harder won." Baba Oje raised his staff. "Adesewa," he declared, "your debt to the gods is paid, but your debt to Okuta remains." A ripple passed through the crowd. "You are not banished," the oracle continued, "but you will not walk among us as before. For 12 years you shall live by the shrine. You will serve there tending sacrifices, keeping the sacred fires burning. You will live apart, that you may reflect on the ways you have led us astray." 12 years. The words settled over Adesewa like a second burden, one not on her head, but in her soul. Yet she did not protest. She nodded, slowly, solemnly. "I accept," she whispered, her voice hoarse. Her parents wept softly at the back of the crowd. Mr. Ajibade pulled his cap low over his eyes, swallowing his pride, while Mrs. Ajibade clutched a handkerchief to her mouth. They had raised her in love, but without guidance, and now they too bore the bitter fruits of that failure. The villagers parted, making way as Adesewa walked through, head bowed. Some averted their eyes. Others watched her go with a mixture of pity and cold judgment. A small hut had been built near the ancient shrine on the village's edge, a humble dwelling with a thatched roof and a single earthen window. There, Adesewa would spend her days fetching water, tending the sacred fires, sweeping the shrine floor with a broom made of palm fronds. It was a life of solitude, but not of despair. In the quiet, Adesewa began to understand herself, not as the city girl who had once delighted in attention and praise, but as a woman stripped bare of vanity, rebuilding slowly from the ruins of her mistakes. As the seasons passed, the village healed. Crops flourished again, the river sang louder, and the people of Okuta reclaimed their laughter. But they never forgot. Parents told their children the story of Adesewa, a cautionary tale of pride, temptation, and the cost of straying from the path of honor. They would say, "It is easy to chase what glitters, harder to protect what matters." And deep in the heart of Okuta, near the shrine where the sacred fires burned, a woman tended the flames, her hands steady, her heart contrite, a living reminder of the strength it takes to fall, to rise, and to walk the long, lonely road to redemption. The years rolled by in Okuta, marked by the gentle cycle of rains and harvests, of festivals and moonlit dances. Life returned to its rhythm, but it was not the same rhythm as before. The village had learned a bitter lesson. No longer did they boast idly about their daughter's purity or their adherence to traditions. Instead, they spoke softly, reminding each other and their children that honor was not something worn on the outside, but a light tended carefully within the soul. The Council of Elders, led by Bele Akinlolu, instituted new rites not just to celebrate the maidenhood of young girls, but to teach them lessons of humility, wisdom, and the weight of choices. Girls were taught not only to honor the village's customs, but to understand why that respect was not blind obedience, but a conscious choice to protect the community's future. And at the center of these quiet reforms, though never openly acknowledged, was the shadow of Adesewa. In her little hut near the shrine, Adesewa kept the sacred fires alive. By day she cleaned and swept, and by night she knelt by the flame, whispering prayers no one heard but the gods. She grew lean and strong, her once proud hands now rough with labor, her once loud spirit now tempered with grace. In the 12th year of her penance, on a clear night, when the stars glittered like the eyes of the ancestors, Baba Oje came to her hut. He stood silently at the doorway, his staff planted firmly in the earth. "You have served well, Adesewa," he said. His voice, though aged, carried a kindness that had not been there before. Adesewa rose slowly, her heart uncertain. "Tomorrow you will come before the council." The next day, for the first time in 12 years, Adesewa stepped into the heart of Okuta, not as an outcast, but as a woman remade. The villagers gathered, curious and cautious. Some wore the wary expressions of old wounds not yet fully healed, but others looked on with something gentler, the beginnings of respect. Bale Akinlolu rose from his seat. His hair was whiter now, his posture slightly bowed with age. "Adesewa," he said, "you came to us bright with the ways of the world. In your pride, you led our daughters astray, but in your humility you have taught us a greater truth, that strength lies not in never falling, but in the courage to rise again." The council murmured in agreement. "For 12 years you have carried the weight of your actions, not with bitterness, but with grace. Today we lift your burden." He stepped forward and placed in her hands a small woven mat, simple, yet intricately patterned with the symbols of renewal and rebirth. "You are free to return to your family, or to stay among us. If you stay, you will be not a servant, but a teacher to guide our daughters, and to remind our sons that the heart of tradition is not in rules, but in respect." Tears blurred Adesewa's vision as she clutched the mat to her chest. The people of Okuta bowed their heads not in shame, but in recognition. Adesewa chose to stay. She built a new hut closer to the village square, and there she began to teach not just the girls, but the boys too. She taught them that beauty fades, but honor endures, that freedom without wisdom is a path to ruin, that traditions must be lived, not worn. In time, the village flourished, not just in crops and livestock, but in spirit. And Adesewa's name, once spoken in anger and regret, became a lesson whispered with reverence. For the fires she had tended in solitude had not merely warmed the gods. They had reignited the soul of Okuta itself.